First off, we have Mitch Marlowe as our first professional speaker. Mitch is a 23-year-old student living with a painful, incurable, and invisible genetic disability called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Over many years of struggle, he's worked to become an effective advocate for himself and others with invisible disabilities. He's eager to share the many personal and life-changing lessons learned along the way of a difficult journey. This speech is the story of the last 10 years, how the pain started in 2009, not being believed for anyone for 4 years, until his confirmed diagnosis, resulting in suicide attempts from that lack of treatment, overcoming that, and becoming what he is now, an advocate for himself and others, and stories of that recent advocacy work. So can we have a huge round of applause for our first presenter, Mitch Marlowe.
Thank you, Jay.
Hi, my name is Mitch Marteau. I'm here to talk a bit about my experiences as someone with an invisible disability and the lessons I have learned along the way. I have been in constant pain since 2009 from a condition known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, commonly referred to by the abbreviation EDS. Don't worry if you've never heard of it. That's part of the reason I'm doing this. EDS results in the production of defective collagen, which is the glue that holds all our bodies together and is a much neglected connective tissue disease. In healthy people, collagen is like superglue, but in people like me, it's more like having some string wrapped around a paperclip and hoping that that will hold the entirety of your body together. Most of us look perfectly healthy, aside from being overly flexible. I myself can pop my shoulder out on command. Can you think of a greater superpower? Those with EDS aren't born with chronic pain in a majority of cases, but have it triggered from physically stressful situations, such as childbirth or fighting off a viral infection. I personally caught the H1N1 influenza virus during the swine flu pandemic of 2009, along with a secondary strep throat infection. Being in pain while so sick is normal, but the problem for me is that the pain never went away, even after beating the virus. Over 10 years later, the pain has only gotten worse. The prognosis for EDS patients is unclear, so we spend much of our time living in the fear of the unknown. Since the future of people with EDS is unpredictable, ranging from chronic pain to premature death, it's important for us to focus on what we can do, like me coming here to give this speech. EDS patients have been dubbed as zebras. This is because of an old saying in medicine. When you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. But what if, through some hapless circumstance, you're actually a zebra? Doctors will tend to choose a common diagnosis over a rare one, given symptoms that seem to fit either condition. This means if they're in North America and they hear hoofbeats, they should assume it's a horse, because that's the most likely scenario by orders of magnitude. But zebra hoofbeats sound the same as horse hoofbeats, so on occasion the doctor may wrongfully assume you're a horse and will diagnose you as one, even if you're actually zebra that just doesn't fit the usual pattern. Once a doctor paints brown over your natural black and white stripes, it becomes very difficult to be seen as anything else in the eyes of other doctors, friends, and family. However, it's important to see this from the perspective of the doctors as well. They can't always be thinking of the rare zebras all the time. Doctors are trained to diagnose what is the most probable, so certain obscure illnesses will inevitably slip past them. All they can do is be open to listening to the patients when they say what does and doesn't fit. There are many different types of EDS. I personally have the hypermobility type, which primarily affects the joints, so I have constant excruciating pain that gets worse whenever I walk or stand up. There is also a vascular type, which can be less painful but far more dangerous because the arteries in the body can suddenly burst from the connective tissue holding the vessels together being so weak. As a result of this, half of those with vascular EDS are dead by their 40s. The pain varies from individual to individual, so the best I can do is to describe mine. First, there are multiple layers to it. There's a constant dull achiness that covers the entirety of my legs every second of every day. It is a musculoskeletal pain, so connective tissue joints are what hurt. The only times this has gone away is when I receive general anesthetic from surgeries. On top of that dull pain, there is an intermittent sharp pain that it feels like trying to walk on a leg that has millions of tiny knives embedded within it. Finally, there's the burning pain that is more specific to my upper body. It's a lot for one mind to process this constant stimulation, and so concentrating enough to give this talk is itself a challenge. When thrust into this confusing and debilitating situation at the age of 14, you learn a lot of lessons and have to grow up a lot faster than you like. This becomes a lot more complicated, yet all the more important when you aren't initially believed by your doctors. I saw the best doctors in the province from every field imaginable, and for years they were all equally clueless as to deducing the source of my pain. Fibromyalgia, myositis, chronic fatigue syndrome, conversion disorder, post-viral neuralgia. I flitted from one diagnosis to another like a headless chicken, running in circles, trying to figure out the source of the hoofbeats. For 4 years, my doctors had been convinced that the underlying cause of my pain was a mental issue rather than a physical one. I didn't think I was crazy, but I knew that even if I was a result of my pain rather than the other way around. So the best my doctors could do was refer me to a psychiatrist and prescribe antidepressants, as he would never figure out and treat what was really wrong with me. This only ended with a fateful visit to a new neurologist in Toronto. It started out as a typical appointment for me. We did a nerve conduction study which was negative, and so the doctor apologized and said he couldn't help me, just like the numerous other doctors I had seen. Heartbroken, as I stood up to leave, he heard my joints constantly cracking and told me to look up Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a disorder he happened to have expertise in. The glimmer of hope was too tantalizing to wait for, so I googled the condition on my phone while my dad drove me home. We found so many of the symptoms I had endured in the previous years, and so my dad and I got more and more excited. It explained everything, even things that seemed to be completely unrelated, such as the multiple severe hernias I had when I was 10, and the surgery I had to fix one last year. By the time we got home, long before I was officially examined, we knew we had finally found the answer. Suddenly, I was no longer perceived as crazy, and life drastically changed for the better. It's strange to think that being diagnosed with a chronic painful disease with limited treatment could make me so happy, but it did, since it completely validated everything I've been saying for years. That's why even when your situation seems utterly hopeless, you have to still keep going, waiting for that one lucky break. I immediately got to work on learning more about this condition and started going to support groups so I could meet other people with EDS, some of whom had been suffering for decades. This was one of the first steps I took in becoming my own best advocate. When you get a new diagnosis, learn absolutely everything you can about it. Most of your doctors won't be well informed about your specific condition, so the patient must do some of the research heavy lifting themselves. Some will even take out medical textbooks and may even have to resort to other sophisticated methods of diagnosis, such as Googling your condition in front of you. And my own self-advocacy started simple, convincing my doctors they were wrong about the underlying cause of my pain being a mental issue rather than a physical one. When people are wrongfully calling you crazy, then the worst thing you can do is lose your nerve and lash out at them, because that would only help to prove their point. Am I crazy for believing them? Am I crazy for not believing them? Am I crazy for wondering if I'm crazy? Who is crazier, the crazy person who refuses to admit they're crazy, or the crazy person who does? What if it really is just mind over matter? What if it's just about getting the muscles strong enough to stabilize the joints? So many what ifs. Because the alternative is too much to bear. The alternative is I don't know what's wrong with me, and maybe I never will. I thought I knew, and I did everything I was supposed to do. I braved the transit to the downtown doctor appointments, despite the inevitable spike in pain, just from standing and walking a few minutes. At one such appointment, I tested the limits of the term waiting room when I waited the entire day and read a book cover to cover before being seen by the physician. As I sat there bored, I thought to myself, hey, I have so much time I could write a book myself, so I did. But from the comfort of home, starting out in 2011 in the form of blog posts. I just finished it as a memoir a year ago and called it Bend or Break, a title with a double meaning. Bending refers to being both physically and mentally flexible and accepting the necessity of compromise. At that time in my life, even with pain medication such as morphine, sleep was scarce. Pain is hard enough to deal with on its own, but if you're perpetually exhausted, it becomes literally unbearable. And so, I attempted suicide via medication overdose. I had come to realize that this was the only solution available to finally put an end to the pain. If I wasn't being believed, what hope was there of getting better? The lack of treatment and all the looming what-ifs broke me down until I was a miserable shadow of my old self. After I made that attempt and narrowly survived, all my medications were taken away, which of course only made things worse. I was placed in a psych ward for a few months following this, and they wouldn't let me sleep in late or even use my cane. I wallowed in misery in a location utterly unequipped to manage someone going through morphine withdrawal, with no real doctors around. They gave me tiny kidney basins to throw up in, and then a night shift nurse wouldn't help me, or even find someone who could help me, when I started vomiting blood. When you are severely sleep deprived, with debilitating excruciating pain, and are surrounded by people who don't believe you, it's hard enough, if not impossible, to stay calm and articulate. Of course, being a good self-advocate in such a situation demands that you be at the top of your argumentative game rather than at the bottom. All you can do is keep trying to get the truth out. Eventually, my persistence paid off and my true physical problem was discovered. Self-advocacy can also be more private, but no less crucial. Even when your doctors begin to actually treat your real disease, there are dangers that only increase the more doctors you have, and I still have plenty. If you've ever heard the phrase, too many cooks in the kitchen, know this can also apply in medicine. When you have too many doctors involved without good communication with each other, you risk accidental and dangerous medication interactions. In 2014, it was left up to me to figure out what was wrong when I suddenly became even more ill than I already was. I developed the worst stomachache of my life, along with excruciating cramping, feverishness, and malaise. I started to think I got sick with a virus, but that evening I had dinner with my family and was feeling extremely irritable for no reason that I could grasp. Sure, I'd been irritable before like anyone else, but it was always for a clear specific reason. I started to think maybe the medications I had recently started were involved, so I Googled my symptoms along with the name of the medications I was put on and discovered an interaction called Serotonin Syndrome that fit the bill, which my doctor then confirmed. The basics of this life-threatening complication is that excess serotonin throughout your body will literally drive you crazy and then kill you if it gets severe enough. The sudden irritability I was feeling was the first step in that process. It's certainly possible I saved my own life by being proactive in my healthcare. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. It can be a literal lifesaver. In terms of advocating for myself and those suffering with me, I sensed an opportunity a few years ago when my mother was elected as the Member of Provincial Parliament for Thornhill. May was the EDS Awareness Month, so I wrote a statement in cooperation with the EDS Canada organization, which my mom would then read to the legislature at Queen's Park, with an audience of many people with EDS. Some of the older members of our group had been fighting for official recognition from the government for their entire lives, and so were shedding tears of joy at finally being recognized. A couple of months later, the Ontario government announced the opening of the first clinic in Canada entirely dedicated to those with EDS. I became one of their first patients, and they referred me to several specialists who know as much about EDS as anyone in the country. It's rare to see such tangible results from advocacy work. It's not always so flashy in public, but it's always worth doing. The note I'd like to end on is asking everyone out there, especially others with chronic and invisible illnesses, to please learn from my mistakes as much as my successes. I've gone from actively trying to destroy my own future to doing everything I can as a patient and activist to secure it. It's tricky to find the balance between being a reasonable medical patient, and fighting the good fight to salvage any progress in your life and care. Much of this balance has to be figured out on your own as you grow from your experiences, but I hope this talk makes that road a little easier for anyone else out there struggling and suffering. Thank you for lending your time and ears to my story and listening to my TED Talk. I'd like to thank Faith Balshan, Jay Patel, and the York TED Talk X Committee for inviting me to this event, and all of you in the audience for lending your time and ears to my story.